Thank you for the introduction. I'm not going to introduce my guests since you've already all been introduced, but thank to all of you for being here. Thank you to the audience for being here, and thanks to the organizers for organizing this excellent event. My name is Dominik. I'll be moderating this discussion, and we're going to be talking about the other, sometimes less discussed aspects of what actually makes countries safe. Because we often talk about quite a narrow scope of what we mean by security. We talk about conventional military, we maybe talk about things like hybrid warfare, but the actual definition of what makes us resilient, what makes us safe, is much broader. And it encompasses things from economic safety, economic power, economic warfare, to nuclear safety. And I'll be talking about all of that with my excellent guests here. So let me start with Mr. Yoshida, because we have quite a geographically diverse panel. So I'll start with a guest who's representing Japan and who's coming from the furthest from here. And when it comes to economic security, Japan is in quite a unique situation because it is one of the biggest economies in the world. It's, I think, the fourth largest economy, which obviously gives it a certain geopolitical advantage. But also the challenge it's facing is coming from China, which has a much larger economy. It has a significant economic influence, and it has a control over manufacturing chain. It has access to a large amount of technology that we all use. So in that sense, Japan is also facing a disadvantage. So how is Japan approaching both of that, both this advantage and the disadvantage, and what can we maybe learn from that here in Europe?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me this wonderful occasion opportunity. I would like to point out the holistic manner, the defense efforts that Japan is promoting in this respect. Some of the things may be the answer to your direct questions. The security environment surrounding Japan is getting increasingly severe. As you pointed out, of course, China's massive military build-up, as well as the North Korea's program of the development of the mass destruction weapons, nuclear and missiles, and also the mutual engagement among the countries like China, Russia, and North Korea. Therefore, we are surrounded by their nuclear possessors. Believe that one of the most severest security environment. The threat is coming just not from the traditional land, air, and sea, but also the hybrid and the gray zone offenses as well. So that Japan has to address 2G's growing threat entirely. Therefore, I would like to elaborate that the 4 points of the defense efforts, the security efforts of Japan. The first pillar is, of course, the defense capability development. Government determined to double down defense spending. Originally, just 1% of the GDP a couple of years ago. Now the target is 2% of GDP. And the Prime Minister, who took office quite recently, moved up 2 years earlier than original plan. And also the position of the deterrence capability, the long-standing, the counter-strike long-range standoff missiles, to enhance our deterrence and response capability, together with the deterrence provided by the United States. So while ensuring the upgrade of the US, the alliance with the US, at the same time, Japan is stepping up development of its own defense capabilities. And the second aspect is the defense R&D and the industry development. Enacted the law to allow government to assist directly the defense industries, and also facilitate the private-public partnership and the application of the cutting-edge dual-use technology for defense purposes. And also, Japan engaged the international joint project of the GCAP, development of their next-generation jet fighter with the United Kingdom as well as Italy. Japan also signed the document with the United States to mutually exploit the defense equipment development. Maybe in the future, similar efforts will be discussed with the NATO partners as well. And the third aspect is the amendment of the restrictive rules of the transfer of defense equipment and technology to the third party. It is quite restrictive at this moment, but there is an ongoing argument to relaxation of this amendment to further explore our markets of the defense industry to the friends and allies. And finally, economic security aspect that you just pointed out. One of the priority is to strengthen the economic security measures. Also enacted the legislation to facilitate the strengthen resilient economic security measures, particularly as emphasizing the stable supply chain of the critical materials, and also identify the core infrastructure areas to enhance the resilience as well as the response against the cyber attack and the gray zone strategy. So there are a number of the promising areas of the application of the Japanese technology at the private sector. Maybe I will come back later in that discussion.
Thank you for those points. Let's get back to Europe. Kristi, I would continue with you. Because you are coming from Estonia and talking about economy and defense buildup, Estonia is in maybe the opposite situation, where Estonia is facing major security threats, just like other frontline Baltic states from Russia, but the economy, because of the size of the population, is very small. So there are big threats, big defense ambitions, but limited economy. How do you square those two things together?
Thank you, and great to be here. Thanks to Linas and the organizers. Well, when Ukrainian President Zelensky visited Estonia, he was speaking in the parliament wearing a sweatshirt with an Estonian word, kaitsetahe. He got this sweatshirt from the Estonian friends. It means will to defend. And this is, of course, one of the critical elements of what keeps a small country safe. We need capabilities. There has been a lot said already during the discussions today about what is it that we need. We certainly need more European capabilities together with our allies. We need to keep the US involved, but I also want to emphasize that Europeans need to acquire capabilities of their own in areas where they have been too dependent on the US. We need stronger air defense. We need stronger long strike capability. We also need to develop our drone capability, and here, of course, the economic innovation, technological innovation comes in very much. We need to develop our intelligence capability in Europe, and we need manpower, which, of course, for a small country is a particular challenge, and again, we need our allies to come to help us with that. Now, with this picture of threats that we are facing, the so-called hybrid threats has been a daily reality for us for many years. And I dare to say that countries neighboring Russia are actually quite resilient, be it to disinformation, cyber attacks, other methods of Russian interference in our domestic politics, Russia trying to enhance cleavages within our societies. We've had all of that for such a long time that we are used to it. I'm more worried actually about how Russia uses these methods of influence, or I think active measures is actually a more appropriate word from the kind of Russian vocabulary, against major European countries. Germany, I think when Russia looks at Europe today, it sees weakness. Lack of capability, lack of will to defend, lack of resilience, and especially in Western European countries. And at the same time, it sees that these countries are becoming stronger. Look at Germany. I think Germans are taking very seriously the need to become more capable, to become more resilient, to strengthen their army, etc. So what does Russia want to do in this situation? Of course, it wants to block this development. So it tries to do everything it can to stop the increase of defense spending in countries like Germany and other major Western European powers. It wants to increase the cleavages in German society in order to reduce support for the current defense policy direction and reduce support for Ukraine in society. So this is where I think the big Western European countries can actually learn from countries like Estonia about how to counter these Russian methods of influence and kind of how to live with them and how to strengthen our defense capability nevertheless and not let Russia kind of divert our attention and create these cleavages that it wants to create within and between European countries. And just one final point, when we think of what makes European countries safe, and in particular countries neighboring Russia, our efforts have to start from Ukraine. Russia has to be stopped in Ukraine if we want to prevent a war between Russia and NATO. And this is again something where we need to keep our strategic focus very clear and keep doing the maximum to make sure that Ukraine remains a sovereign country, that we continue with integration of Ukraine to Europe, including the defense industrial capability where Europeans need Ukraine on our side in order to be able to deter Russia in future. Thanks.
Well, I want to give space to other speakers as well, and they will have the opportunity in a minute. But let me just dig deeper with one inconvenient question, because I think that inconvenient questions are what makes panels like this interesting. You've mentioned the differences between countries like Estonia and the large Western European countries. And one of the differences is the size of the defense spending, the differences in percentages. All the Baltic countries give already very high percentages, around 5%, but you also have large Western countries like Spain or Canada who still haven't met the 2% threshold that we've agreed on in 2014. And countries like Italy are still barely at the 2%. What's your view on that? And how much does that show about the will to defend Europe?
I do sense an increasing sense of resentment in northern part of Europe at this situation where we agree all in principle that Russia is a long-term threat and we have made our commitments to increase defense spending, and it is only happening in a handful of countries in the northern part of Europe and not the rest. So, of course, this is a problem, and certainly Russia is watching it closely. What a small country like Estonia can do, I don't think there is much point really to lecture others. The Estonian approach has been to try to lead by example. Just keep doing the maximum we can and use our power of persuasion and our model, and also showing that it is possible. Because what we often hear from the Southern European countries is that, oh, but for us, because of socioeconomic reasons, because of our healthcare, education, etc., it is impossible. Well, then we can say, do you think it is easy for us? I mean, we also need to find the ways to invest this money in defense, more than 5% of GDP next year. And it comes at the cost of something else. But it takes then political vision and leadership to explain to the people that we need to do it. I understand very well it is much more difficult to do in Spain, where Russia is far away. So the arguments have to be a little bit different in different countries. But for the Spaniards, I think what they need to understand is that if we fail together in deterring Russia, and if we fail to prevent a broader war in Europe, then we will not have the EU as we have had it during the past decades. We lose the basis of our welfare in Europe. The integration model will collapse. Our common market will collapse. So the stakes are just so high. And I hope the politicians all over Europe will find then the right arguments to persuade their own populations.
Ilan, let me ask you about the same issue, but to ask for the view from Washington, because you're the only American on the panel, and America is maybe the only country that actually has the ability to pressure European countries into much higher defense spending, as we're already seeing, but we still do have these large, quite wealthy countries that are lagging behind quite significantly. And we are getting into a situation where it's a bit of a two-speed Europe, with Nordic and Eastern Europe on one hand and Southern Europe on the other. If I ask for the view from Washington, first, is there concern about this? And what can we do about it? And what can maybe America do to balance this out?
So I think that's exactly the right question, because there is a tremendous amount of distance across the pond in terms of perceptions.
Maybe just your microphone a bit.
Oh, a little, yeah, okay. Better? Better, okay. I think there is a real gap, a perception gap. And I think, as Kristi was talking about, I think, unfortunately, some of that lack of seriousness from Western Europe is filtering its way across the pond, in the sense that when America looks eastward and we don't see a united Europe, we don't see a Europe that's as seized as this region is about the Russia threat, it's easy to say it's their problem. They don't even have their act together. We're almost 4 years into this war. How can we be more European than the Europeans, right? I think that's a valid point. I think there is a tremendous benefit to thinking holistically, as we started talking about holistically about defense. It's not just defense spending, it's transportation, it's infrastructure. Also, if you notice, in the United States, we are in a process of a pretty significant reshuffling of government at the moment, right? With agencies being closed and being shut down. That has second and third order effects for our partners, including our partners in Europe. For example, on the disinformation front, we are rapidly getting out of this game, at least for the moment. And Dominik, I know you've worked on this issue like I have. It strikes me, I don't know if you agree, but it strikes me that there's opportunity within adversity, right? There has been this historic passivity, because there's a reliance, America will always be there to fund, to sort of articulate the vision. That's really not the case anymore, at least not across the board the way it was before. This is an opportunity for Europe to really demonstrate seriousness, to build up infrastructure, to build up capabilities in a way that would actually, I think, very much rebound to the strength of the transatlantic relationship, because it'll show the United States that Europe is really digging in, and it's not just digging in on troops and hardware, it's also digging in on a more holistic view of security.
Thank you. The way I've heard it described is that if there's an American in the room, the Europeans are just going to wait and see for America to lead, and then they will follow. And I think we need to get rid of that mentality. Ruth, let me ask you. You advise a number of European governments on issues of defense, national security. And when it comes to defense spending, this summer, all NATO members have given the pledge of spending at least 3.5% GDP on defense by 2035. But that's 10 years from now. How do we know, and how maybe to prevent that 5 years from now, in 2030, the defense budgets are not in the same place where they are right now? Because you coming from the UK, I think the UK is an example that there's a lot of conflicting priorities when it comes to spending money, and there's not enough money going around. So how can we make sure that this time we actually deliver?
Yeah, thank you, Dominik, and thank you for the invitation to support this panel and the event. I think when we put increased budgets into what is essentially a dysfunctional system, we actually compound the inefficiency. I mean, management science would be all over this and say you shouldn't do it. But of course, when we talk about defense acquisition, defense budgets, we park all the other rules of how we should buy, procure, and look after things. It truly is unique. But if we look across Europe, there's 130 different platforms. That means there's 130 different supply chains. In the US, for example, there's 30. So things are more complex in Europe, and we have to accept that. We need, I think, to get to your point, we need an action-centered strategy, not a rhetoric. And we need to look at a full spectrum suite of defense capabilities, but not nationally, in Europe. And that requires European nations to do now what it's maybe thought it should do before but not get to, which is to decide what it's not going to do. Individual countries saying, I'm not going to invest in this. I could, but I'm not going to do this because you're going to do this. And a far more detailed, informative discussion. Now, we can shrug at this and say, well, it'll never happen, but it is happening. The Netherlands is a really good example of this. It has decided to disinvest in some things and decide what it's good at and invest in other things. And I think it would be very good for other nations to follow that lead. It's complex, and the world has changed when it comes to innovation. Originally, military R&D used to lead the way, and the civilian space would kind of benefit from this kind of research and development. But that's shifted, and that's not the case now. And today we see defense increasingly lag. Now, I think that requires us to have a different conversation with the private sector, which governments are quite often uncomfortable of doing. Now, Ukraine's shown that you have to work with the private sector, and you can. And we're kind of scrabbling across Europe, particularly, I would say, as Kristi describes, the sort of larger Western European countries, about how we get after that. For me, there needs to be what you might call like a sixth domain. You know, you've got the 5 domains of warfare: air, land, maritime, space, and cyber. A sixth domain, which is really an industrial domain, that is integrated far better into the military process, into defense thinking. And it creates a different mindset. It means bringing defense from big prime down to small actors into exercises far closer, into discussions far closer about what the need is. And then you get quicker innovation too. And I think that's an important thing. John Foreman spoke earlier about the impact of the changing character of warfare, and I would just echo his point in that we talk a lot about defense industry and technology and money, etc. But war is a human endeavor. It's a bloody and awful human endeavor, and we do well when we're sat in these comfortable places to remember that. The war we're seeing now has more high-end precision, AI, automation. And we shouldn't be surprised by that, right? We've done a lot of foresight thinking that shows that that's coming. That's not a surprise. But it's also changed the face of what the industrial peace looks like. It's not these sort of long production lines, long jobs. I mean, of course that exists. We build submarines in the UK, right? That doesn't happen quickly. So that still exists, but it's challenged by this quick tech diversity role, and I think we're scrabbling. What I would say is that Russia's war on Ukraine is not the war of the future. It is the war of now. It's the war of the present. So I think we need to remember that this is happening now, and anything we're doing to counteract is in the moment. So we must keep this kind of further look at high-end and what I would call garden shed research and development, and somehow be able to address this. I would just mention, in the 1940s, I like history, right? In the 1940s, everyone agreed on the battlefield that the German Tiger was the best tank. It was hands down the deadliest, most effective, with the best trained crews in it. Absolutely. The Americans believed it too. It was worth 4 Sherman tanks. But here's the difference. The Americans brought 5 Sherman tanks. Now, my point is that mass, in some cases, will continue to matter. And these hard metal machines will also continue to matter. And I'm hoping we get to issues of the economy in questions and how we can address that. But I'll just make one final point, and this is about the will to fight. I absolutely accept what Kristi's saying, and this is a problem in Western Europe. It's largely a problem because there are low levels of trust in governments in Western Europe. And I come from a big Western European country. I'm very proud to be British. I didn't vote Brexit, so I'm also very proud to be European. But there is a low level of trust and also a low level of threat perception. And when you combine those two together, it's exceedingly challenging to get someone, a real feeling and support for defense spending. There's enormous support in the UK for the armed forces, but that's not quite the same thing as defense spending. There's also enormous support for Ukraine, but again, it's not the same thing. So I would just close by saying the UK Defence Select Committee recently, in the last couple of days, issued a report that really starts to nail this, that we need to talk to our populations about these hybrid threats, about the sabotages, not be embarrassed in saying we were attacked and this is who we believe did it, to try and change the narrative. In the UK, we've been very shy about doing that, and we need to not be. Otherwise, I think we risk being in a position that only being in war will prepare us for war, and that's not a place anybody really wants to be. Thanks, Dominik.
Thank you. We are getting quite a lot of questions. Please do send more, and I think we should answer some of them. And one of them is a clear follow-up to what we were just talking about, what you spoke, so I'll direct it to you as well. Because you say that it's not just about how much we spend, but about how we spend it, and that Europe is spending it very inefficiently, and even though we spend almost as much as the United States, we get far less for it because we spend it individually rather than collectively. But how do we actually fix that? Should it be the EU that takes charge for that, like the European Defense Agency? Should it be, but countries like the UK are not in the EU, should it be NATO, which doesn't really deal with economy and equipment purchases, or should it be some different mechanism altogether? Because I agree, but I think sometimes it's easier said than actually done in practice of how exactly this change should be implemented.
It certainly is easier said than done. No, I don't think NATO should go anywhere near procurement. It's filled with military officers, and I was a military officer for nearly 30 years. We do not know how to do this very well, okay? So it shouldn't. What NATO's given us is a list of the stuff we should buy. And we need to pay attention to that. When people say, well, what do we spend the money on, etc., there's a list from NATO and capabilities. It's already out there. It's already been agreed by all the member nations. So let's stop looking elsewhere for that. It's already known. One of the problems that we try to tell our nations, and this is really true across the Western European countries, is that spending on defense will make us rich and prosper. only it doesn't, right? There are aspects that do, yeah, foreign military sales, for sure, yeah, which is why we had American guests here talking about this. Yes, that's good. But there are other things that governments spend their money on which are far more efficient to be prosperous. You know, infrastructure, health, education, etc., that ends with an end product that actually itself can generate money. Defense doesn't. It builds stuff that just sits there just in case. So we have to stop with this discussion about the link to prosperity and start to look at things about like offset. Offset is something that in the UK we don't use as effectively as we could. So putting money into defense spending, if defense industrial primes and small businesses, etc., are able to plow that into the wider economy. And I think that goes across France, across Germany. Certainly, I think Sweden are much better at it, to be honest, than the UK, which is bizarre because in the UK we have an enormous defense industry. So, but we're not good at making that transition across. Now, I think to get to your point about, you know, will we come from the EU? I don't think, being realistic, that the UK government will nod along to the EU regulations when it comes to purchasing and procurement. I think it's we need to find a way to come together to allow the UK to bring everything it can into Europe, and it can offer a lot into Europe in a way that is effective for the here and now. I think the UK is ready to make concessions, and I think that needs to go two ways from within the EU.
Thank you. I will ask from now on to make slightly shorter answers because we have a lot of questions and not much time. And I do have one question specifically for you, Kristi. I'll read it out. In addition to reintroduction of conscription, what else could the Baltic states do to strengthen security? Are areas with the majority of Russian speakers a security issue?
Thank you. First of all, Estonia is one of the very few countries in Europe that maintained conscription all the time after the end of the Cold War. And that's, of course, because the threat assessment was that Russia did not disappear being a threat. But what else we can do? I get a lot, of course, this question about the Russian-speaking population. Well, the threat to us is Russia. And the threat is that, according to the Russian doctrine, Russia can use it as an excuse that they need to intervene in order to defend Russians. Whether it is citizens of Russia, citizens of any other country, that is a reason for Russia to intervene if they see that they need to defend these people. And actually, it doesn't matter what these Russian speakers themselves think about it, unfortunately. So if Russia wants to use this excuse, they will do it. And they will find this handful of people that they need who live in Estonia and say that their rights are being oppressed and they want Russia to defend them. Most of the Russian speakers in Estonia don't want Russia to defend them with tanks and bombs, as we see happening in Ukraine. So the issue really is the way Russia uses different tools and excuses and ways to manipulate our publics and also publics in the West to try to make all of you believe that Russia is intervening in other countries because of some noble humanitarian reasons. So that is the threat, and that is what we need to understand in Western countries, how Russia operates with these issues. Thank you. And now, unfortunately, I have to leave for the airport. Thank you all.
That's okay. Yeah. I would ask for applause. Thank you very much. Tomoyuki, let me get back to the Pacific aspect for a little bit as well. Because the two theaters are far apart, but to an extent, they are similar. The threats are similar. The countries like Japan have a lot in common in terms of values with Europe and NATO member states. What, and I would ask for quite a brief answer, what can we do both sides better or more to increase the cooperation so that it makes both countries like Japan and European countries safer?
Okay. First of all, our threat perception is quite similar. The growing engagement among the countries of Russia, China, North Korea, this indicates that we need to be more united and we need to resilient engagement with each other. Through the mechanism of the NATO plus IP4 Indo-Pacific for dialogue, we had better to deepen our strategic communication and discussion. And the second, I made clear earlier that Japan is also stepping up defense industry and defense building. There are many things that we can do together. What we learned from the war in Ukraine, the shortage of the ammunition, the weapons, and also the interoperability and the standardization of the weapons. That could be the things that we need to discuss in a very speedy space.
Thank you. Next question I would ask to all three of you, and because we do have a limited time, I would ask for relatively short answers, and one that's very timely. The question asks how to prevent hybrid attacks of Russia against NATO members, which is something that almost all NATO members are seeing at the moment. Are we only reacting or doing something to prevent hybrid attacks in the future? Can we be proactive?
Okay, I'll try. Very quickly, so I think the question is where and what kind of attack? Because obviously the hybrid threat that is confronting Central and Eastern Europe is both informational and physical. In Western Europe, it's much more conceptual. It's, I think, much further away. It's easier to dismiss. The question really is a question of deterrence, because it's one thing to defend, but it's always easier to attack than to defend. The conversation that, from my perch in Washington, I'm really not seeing enough of here on the European continent is, how do you impose costs for hybrid war on Russia? How do you punch back in the cyber domain, in the informational domain, right? It's not just about the strategy that the Russians are employing succeeds because it falls below the threshold of conflict. It makes it hard for the countries that are affected to actually respond. There has to be a more sophisticated, calibrated response mechanism that actually ratchets up the cost for the Russians for carrying out aggressive activities below the threshold of open war.
Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah, just add briefly that attribution is one of the most important things. So really clear attribution, unashamed calling out of that, and saying to very publicly, we know it's this. This is, you have to be careful to say this is how you know something, because you don't want to give away your countermeasures and your understanding. So you have to be careful of that, but not being afraid to say this is who it is, this is why we think it is, and this is what we are doing as a result of that. Bang. It might be a sanction, it might be something greater, it might be kicking someone out of the country, it might be doing something else. And you can use soft power in order to impact that too. But you have to call it out, otherwise you just carry on letting them have an effect.
Thank you. And finally, the view from Japan and maybe lessons learned or experiences that have worked for you, as long as you can fit them in 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. Well, with regard to their cognitive warfare, as well as their
hybrid warfare and
hybrid warfare, yeah, this is quite a common threat for us as well. But we haven't yet deepened the exchange of views and the information and the intelligence of the both sides. This is the time that we had to better explore the dialogue on this aspect as well. And also, we have to enhance the awareness of the population, the citizens, in order not to be manipulated by the foreign actors.
Well, thank you so much. We're almost out of time, so I would ask you for a big applause to all of my fantastic guests. And thank to you for your attention and your time as well.